ClancyPasta presents I Don't Like the View from My New Office, written by HeadOfSpectre. Let me just make it clear. I'm a big deal. I worked my ass off to get where I am today, and I work my ass off to stay there. I'm young, successful, and I know I'm not crazy. I'm not going to tell you my name, obviously. Why would I out myself like that? The last thing I need is someone finding out about this. But it's been going on for days now, and I don't know what to do or who to tell. I'm the only one that sees it. I'll explain a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, I took over as the vice president of the company I work at. I won't tell you what company it is. Aside from we're a tech company with an office in Mississauga, Ontario. We're in an office on the other side of the highway from the airport. Planes pass so close to our building that we can hear them as they descend. My new office faces away from the airport, but on a clear day, you can see the skyline of Toronto in the distance. From where I sit, I can see the planes coming in for a landing. It's actually kind of pretty. The first couple of days went pretty well. I got set up in my new office and started with my new position. I already knew how to do the job, so I was a natural fit. The weather was kind of shitty. It's been cold and snowy, but my office was nice and toasty warm. The snowstorms didn't bother me. Watching the flurries pass around the other office buildings was kind of pretty, and if I wasn't too busy, I'd let myself watch for a bit. It was on the third day when I first noticed it. The storm wasn't too bad that day. If I looked, I could faintly see the skyline of Toronto in the distance. It was something to admire when I needed a break from emails and spreadsheets, or during one of the countless boring dial-in meetings. I'd sit there as others talked, staring out the window since I was too distracted to work, and they weren't sharing screens at the moment. At the time, I was in a call about last year's Q4 revenue. There wasn't much I could contribute to it, so I listened and looked out the window at the swirling snow and the silhouette of the CN Tower in the distance. I watched for a while before the movement caught my attention. I stared at it, rolling my chair closer to my window to get a better look. It was hard to see through the storm, but after a while, I was pretty sure something was walking beside the tower. To those who don't know what the CN Tower is, Google it. It's a 533-foot tall tower in Toronto, and whatever I thought I saw was clearly the same height. I'd stopped listening to the call, stared for the longest time, watching it move. It never seemed to get any closer. It just seemed to pass behind the tower, and then keep going until it was out of my view. For a while I just sat there in awe, before getting up and allowing myself a quick bathroom break. I kept close to the windows on my floor, searching for any other sign of that thing, but I didn't see anything. Eventually, I finally did go to the bathroom, and got back on the call. I figured that whatever I saw was just a trick of my mind. I saw some snow, and it kind of looked like something else. No big deal, right? The next day was almost just as bad in regards to the snowstorms. I sat behind my desk having almost forgotten about my laughably stupid delusion of something walking through Toronto. I'd taken out my lunch and was enjoying it when I happened to glance out the window again. There it was. It was faint, but I could see it through the flurries. Tall and humanoid. It appeared through the storm, moving slowly around the buildings in Toronto. I watched as it passed the CN Tower again, but this time it was bigger. No, not bigger. Closer. I watched as it made its way through the buildings of Toronto, a slow, meaningful march, towards some sort of unknown destination. It took me a while before I realized that its destination wasn't random. It was coming straight for my building. The walker made a slow approach, but even as the snowstorm raged around it, it got clearer and clearer. I let the clock tick past as I watched, and something finally dawned on me. No one else in the office was reacting. I heard nothing outside the norm. On shaking legs, I stood up and walked out of my office. I could still see the walker through the other windows. It was clearly there. I walked up to one of them, with one of the workers' cubicles right beside it. He looked up at me expectantly before relaxing when he saw I obviously wasn't there to yell at him or anything. "Wow. Is this ever gonna let up?" I asked. I didn't want to call attention to that thing, but I needed to see him look out the window. He looked all right, staring into the storm and at the distant walker. "Well, typical weather for January," he said, with a nervous chuckle. I nodded in response. He was staring right at it. How could he not see it? It was there, looming ahead of us. Its movements were slow, but it had to be covering several kilometers with each step. The closer it got, the more massive it seemed. I realized that when I'd seen it go behind the CN Tower, it must have been much further away than I'd initially suspected. This thing obviously towered over the most definitive feature of the Toronto skyline. It had to be miles tall. I couldn't even fathom how such a massive thing could exist in our world, and yet be unnoticed by everyone. "Sir?" I looked down at the employee I'd bothered. He was staring at me as I looked out the window. "Oh, yes? Typical January weather." I mumbled it under my breath before I snuck off to go back to my office. I couldn't focus on my work. This thing was much more important now. If no one else saw it, I wondered if I could get a picture. I took out my phone and tried, but all I saw on the screen was the storm and the skyline. The walker was nowhere to be seen. I lowered my phone. It hadn't gone anywhere. I watched as it seemed to weave past the buildings of Toronto as it continued its slow, torturous approach. My phone rang, and I answered it as calmly as possible. Work called my attention back to it, and resisting every urge I had to run screaming from that building, I tried to focus on my computer. It wasn't easy. Every glance backwards just showed me how much closer that monstrosity was getting. I could see details now. Features of its terrible body. Its shape was human-like, but it most certainly was not anything remotely human. Its flesh seemed to have a brown, patchy texture. As it got closer, I realized that it looked like it was rotting. Its arms were too long and swung lazily at its sides. Its head was a blank slab of rotting meat. It wasn't until much later that I could see it even had eyes, which seemed to look straight ahead at something I couldn't see. The day crept by, and every minute, the walker got closer. God, I couldn't focus. It was almost so close, I could barely see the whole thing through my window anymore. It was big enough that I had no doubt it could crush the entire building underfoot without even noticing. It had the size to do that, at least. Looking down towards its feet, I saw no sign that it affected the world around it. No destruction, nothing. That was my one consolation. It was so close that the top of its head was no longer visible. I sat there, looking at it, looking into its unblinking eyes. I finally realized that they were looking at me. It was looking into my eyes. I could feel it. I, who was too small to even register as a gnat, to something of that incredible size, was being watched by the walker. Knowing that made my heart race in utter terror. Knowing it was coming for me. Knowing I was almost certainly doomed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run and hide and get away. I couldn't tell if it started moving faster then or not, but it seemed to be. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke. Trembling like a child, I packed up my things and told someone I felt sick and I was going to work from home. With my position, no one argued. I barely even said goodbye as I left. When the elevator reached the ground floor, I broke out running into the parking lot to reach my car. God, that thing was still there. On the ground, I could see the size of the walker. It towered over the other buildings in my office complex, despite its distance. The storm blew past it, and I could still see those yellow eyes fixated on me. I froze on the spot, looking at the walker without a pane of glass between us. I watched as it stopped its slow advance for the first time that day. It raised one massive hand and outstretched it towards me, as if it was beckoning me. The eyes never left me. Every nerve in my body told me to run, but that hand was so alluring. What if I reached out to it and turned? What if I accepted the walker and what it seemed to offer? I didn't know, and I never want to find out. I obeyed my body, and I ran. I got into my car and sped out onto the road, driving away from Toronto, away from the walker, away from everything. In my rearview mirror, I saw it. I felt the earth shake with the growl that escaped it. My car almost veered off the road, but I kept going. Even as the storm grew worse, I kept going. Even as the ground shook as the walker pursued me, I kept going. I haven't gone back to work since. I've claimed to be sick. I've taken my calls and done all my work from home. I used garbage bags to cover the windows of my house. I don't want to look outside. I don't want to see. I just want to do my job. I just want to live a fulfilling, successful life. That's all I want. But I suppose it doesn't matter what I want, does it? The walker has chosen me. For what, I do not know. But I see it in my dreams now. I see what it has planned for this world. And I pray to God that it never comes to pass. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/ClancyPasta, or click the join button below to become a member. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.